Hello, everybody. My name is Bruce Montgomery, and this is my colleague, Tracy Priest.
Hello, everyone.
And we're with The Road to Retail. On our podcast, Tracy and I hope to offer insights and ideas for how emerging small and challenger CPG, consumer packaged goods, brands can establish and grow their business.
Bruce and I have been working in CPG commercial operations for over 30 years, working on brands of all sizes. By commercial operations, we mean all aspects involved in establishing and growing brands across channels and platforms. On our show, we bring on guests that are brand founders, leaders, investors, as well as all kinds of suppliers to these emerging brands that are subject matter experts to share their unique insights with the audience.
To keep up with the show, please follow the Road to Retail podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or YouTube. Leave us a review and consider sharing the show with a friend or colleague that may benefit from the content. You can also check out our website at www.road2retail.com and follow The Road to Retail on LinkedIn. Let's get to today's episode. Big Chalk's Emerging Brands New Item Launch and Growth Toolkit transforms retail pitches into successful distribution outcomes. Instead of relying on a founder's story alone, brands gain consumer-validated proof across product concept, packaging, pricing, and marketing plans. Powered by advanced analytics and real-world benchmarks, it converts big ideas into retail-ready selling stories, fast and in a budget-friendly way. In just weeks, emerging brands gain the insights and credibility needed to stand out, lower buyer risk, and drive shelf success. Ready to replace hope with proof? Email emergingbrandswin@bigchalk.co and start building the story retailers can't ignore. Since 1994, the Emerson Group has been the trusted partner to brands, retailers, suppliers, and the CPG industry. Their people are CPG professionals and omnichannel commerce experts. They have built a fully integrated infrastructure with a suite of services and capabilities focused on launching and accelerating the growth of health, wellness, and beauty brands. Powered by their proprietary Omega AI data technology platform, which utilizes a brand's insights and data analytics to create a brand's go-to-market strategy, optimize their omni-channel distribution, build marketing plans, and optimize supply chain. The Emerson Group infrastructure and capabilities serve brands in the United States, Canada, and Mexico. To learn more, visit their website at www.emersongroup.com. Hello, everybody, and thanks for joining us on the latest episode of The Road to Retail. There he is, my friends, Tracy Priest. Tracy, how are you this morning?
Doing fantastic on this wonderful Friday morning, Bruce, and we've got a great episode today, but it's always good to see you here on the Road to Retail podcast.
Well, there's no exits on the Road to Retail. It's a never-ending journey. So why don't you tell us about our guest who's joining us today?
Absolutely. So this is going to be a fantastic episode, and I think we're going to learn a lot today from Sudu Gupta, and he is the CEO and founder of Mirchi Labs. So welcome, Sudu, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, thank you, Tracy and Bruce. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So let's just jump in. Why don't you tell our audience a little bit about yourself and how you got to be the CEO and founder of Mirchi Labs?
For sure. First of all, I want to be upfront telling our audience that I come from a bit a different background than most of your guests are. I did not grow up into on the brand side. Neither I kind of worked with only retail relationships. I come from the data and the technology background. So for last 20 years, almost 2 decades, I have worked with platforms like iTrade, Riversand, Syndigo, and these are the platforms that brands use to manage their product information and also syndicate or distribute it to various retailers and marketplaces. And that is my background. But over the kind of, while working with all these different companies and different platforms, I have worked with almost like 100 plus brands. And while kind of, working through it, I realized there are great products, great brands, a lot of good opportunities with the retail ecosystem, and great platforms as well. But there's always a kind of a missing piece in this equation, which is the kind of readiness or the execution side, which is from for the brands. And that was one of the inspirations that I started my company, Mirchi Labs, where I kind of, started providing that execution and operational help to the brands who are working with any platforms they were kind of, for their data management and syndication to various retailers. And not only that, also in terms of helping them with their cataloging, all the foundational stuff when they want to get into the retail space.
Yeah.
So,
And that-
so
that's so
Sudu,
important.
yeah, so Sudu, we're going to go a little bit deeper there because I appreciate the candor of you saying you didn't grow up in the brand world working with retailers, but I can tell you all of us who did grow up in the brand world working with retailers, whether we like it or not, are being forced into the technology space that you and your firm can really help. I mean, I can't tell you, well, you can tell me, but how complex just getting items set up has become. And, cataloging used to be literally a catalog of products. It might have a UPC code and a photo, and now it's ingredients and all kinds of things. So, as we get deeper into the discussion, maybe let's just level set because our audience is everyone from retailers, investors, all kinds of service providers such as yourselves, and then brand founders and leaders. And some of these folks have come from legacy CPG companies, and others are entrepreneurs that have just had the courage to pursue a great idea. So, talk to us a little bit about exactly what Mirchi Labs does to help small and emerging brands. And I would ask, you know, kind of speak it up at a high level. It's like, okay, you got accepted at Kroger. You think that's great? Here's all the things that need to happen where we can help.
Sure, Bruce. So we are essentially a catalog operations and retail readiness company, retail onboarding company. Those are the services we provide. So in plain English, we come in picture when the buyer says yes to the brand. And as you know, there are a whole set of things that needs to happen before the first PO gets come, written by the retailer to the brand. And this is where kind of, we come in picture in terms of item setup, the EDI readiness, like again, the barcodes, all these foundational work needs to happen. And what Mirchi Lab does with the emerging brands to help set up that foundation so that they are ready for the retail launching on the retailer side.
Yeah, and folks, one of the things Sadhu just referenced when he's talking about getting, cataloging and getting your item retail ready. Retail ready covers a whole spectrum of things like is your packaging retail ready? Is your marketing plan, demand plan retail ready? Sadhu and his firm help you make sure that in that database within the retailer, all the little numbers that guys like me assume someone else knows how to fill out are filled out properly. Because if any of those, if there's a bust anywhere in those various chains when all the systems are speaking to each other, something doesn't work, right? And when things don't work, you can't sell product. Retailers get upset. The interviews Tracy and I have done with retailers, to paraphrase one of the great quotes we got was, I can't tell you how many brands we've accepted that never made it to the shelf because they couldn't get set up. Right? So, can you imagine all the blood, sweat, and tears you and your team have done to get accepted, and then you can't figure out how to cross that last bridge? So, Sidhu, thanks for that high level explanation because I can't stress, folks, how important it is that all these things that seem invisible work flawlessly. Tracy?
Yeah, absolutely. And so to that reference, as Bruce had mentioned, we did talk to a bunch of retailers and they said you'd be just shocked. So talk to us a little bit about, so you're a brand, you get accepted, you're dancing in the parking lot, but you can't get through the process, the setup process. So talk to us a little bit about, why do you think that is? Why can, I mean, I know it's challenging, but maybe share some horror stories with us, which I'm sure you have several.
For sure. And this is the question I probably have most to say about, because that's the gap we kind of, sit in, we fulfill on a daily basis. Um, the short answer is the the buyer relationship is very different than the operational relationship. So the
Yes.
person who says yes and approve kind of, gives you the approval to get your product is not the same person who is in the journey of setting up that product, getting you the requirements, what needs to be sent to the retailer. And this is where things break usually. So kind of, when the brand gets the yes, they celebrate this thing for, for some good time, but now they get this wall, what needs to happen. And so since you asked like, why kind of, they don't pass that line is because they don't know what needs to be done. And this is where companies like us come in and guide the brands in terms of putting the foundation right, just as I was saying earlier, in terms of what does retailer is expecting from you? What are the requirements on the attributes? What are the requirements for images? What kind of barcodes they need? All this needs to happen prior to the first PO gets shipped. And this is kind of, again, goes in the cycle. Once they get yes, we come in picture and we help the brands to kind of, take care of those things.
So, so that you mentioned two things that I think I want to deep dive into. One is the buyer relationship is really important, but the relationship with the person in that setup process is so critical. So what is I guess, the person who is responsible for that? What is are they like the logistics manager? Like, what is their title, I guess, and role? And what would you say to a brand to say, how do you establish that relationships? Because your day-to-day relationship is with the buyer. So talk to us about like, who is that person that you need to become friends with, and how do you become friends with them?
Yeah, so if you talk about that, the second phase of the project. So once it's kind of getting approval, you're good.
Yeah.
The second phase is it could be an item setup team on the retailer side.
Okay.
It could be their support organization, but it's a part of that operational framework within the retailer
Okay.
that you need to kind of get build your relationship with. And they are the one who kind of will educate you or will tell you what exactly a brand needs to get live on that retailer.
Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha. That's so critical. So another follow-up that we want to discuss. So every retailer has a different portal, right? To go and get your brand set up. So there's a complexity right there. It's not one size fits all. You have to understand what Meyer does versus what CVS does, what Walmart does. But talk to us about like the basic things that you need to have as you go into the setup process. And we when you and I talked, we talked about a few of those, but tell our audience like you got to have these like basic five things or you're not going anywhere.
For sure. So Tracy, in that aspect, I would say once, like, even if it's like before you start talking to the buyer, there are few things that you have to have in place. For example, and I can count like, top five maybe
Hmm.
for this conversation. You know, every product that needs to go on shelf has to have a barcode, GS1 barcode. And that something that you cannot buy from secondary market. You have to have a legitimate GS1 prefix from GS1. Based upon that, you kind of have the GLN, which is a global location number for your company, and the G10 barcode for your product. Because every retailer is expecting or requiring you to have a barcode for the product. So that's number one. Number two, I think all retailers that I have worked with, they require brands to have a insurance of liability. Like, that is kind of, certificate of insurance. And some retailers, they ask for $1 million, some ask for 2 million plus, but it depends from retailer to retailer. But retailers wants to make sure that the brands have that COI, and they are added as an insured company or persona on that in that insurance. Um, the third thing I would come down to, like, once it comes from the GS1 barcode, the COIs, you got to have platforms. Either you have an internal team who understands, for example, EDI, which is electronic data exchange. This is how retailers and brands kind of, send and receive the purchase orders, invoices, shipping confirmation. So either the like the brand has an internal team who is expert in EDI, or you start kind of, interviewing the companies, those who are EDI like, providers. Um, Similarly, for the product setup, either you have an internal team which kind of understand the requirement from the retailer side, or you work like with a platform who understand what does it take to get your item set up on a different retailer. So if you go through this kind of, checklist, you got to have a, GS1 barcode, COI, like insurance, liability insurance, and then the EDI and the product setup platforms. Last but not the least, and I can speak more on this thing, is your data readiness, like the product data for your product. What kind of data you have, the images and all those things. You got to start working on this thing from the very beginning because you will need it.
Hmm. So dive in there a little bit. So when you talk about product, two things I want to talk about. One is product images, description, what is your point of difference? You got to have all of that ready to go when you get set up because they're going to ask you for all of that. And I want to also point out to our small emerging brand audience today is those things that Sudu talked about are not free. So there is a cost to get UPCs and GS1 codes. There's a cost to getting set up with an EDI provider so you can get your POs. There's a cost for insurance. And on that note, sometimes it is $2 or $3 million or 5 million, but then some retailers require, depending on the product category, if you're a supplement or you're a skincare, it can go up to what, Sudu, 10 million, 10 million?
That is correct. Like, something which is your kind of you're ingesting something or you're touching, like, product touching your skin,
Yeah.
your insurance kind of, the retailers ask for that liability, for the much higher.
Yeah. So those are things. And then you talked about having an internal team. And a lot of times we talk to founders who are trying to go it by themselves. And Sidhu just pointed out one reason why that's a really bad idea. Because for you to figure all of this out on your own is very time consuming. And if you don't know what you're doing, as Bruce alluded to earlier, you can make mistakes. And if your foundation with the retailer isn't correct, it is going to come back and bite you big time down the road.
And
So,
Chris, I want to add there, and while we are saying this, having an internal team, a champion is great. But as you said earlier, or I think Bruce mentioned this thing, every retailer has a different requirement set. Like CVS is a different portal than that how Amazon accepts data, how Walmart accepts data. So that expertise, like either you're building in-house for like 100 plus retailers or wherever you're sending your content, or you are hiring this expertise from a platform, those who understand this relationship with the retailers.
yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Bruce, any comments there?
Oh yeah, just a couple. So, Sidhu, another thing I'd imagine that's critical in this data for setup is all of the case pack and pallet configurations, like for things like planograms. And for those of you that don't know, folks, that's when you go into a store and you see the section for cookies, that's a planogram. They're not put up there willy-nilly wherever it might fit. So people need to know the dimensions. They need to know the weight. They need to know how many are in each case. Are there inner packs? How many cases go on a pallet? What does the pallet weigh? Is your pallet wrapped? So these are all the little things Sudu and Tracy are talking about that can jump up and bite you. And to Tracy's point, if you're not working with people that know exactly what they're doing and you're a smaller firm, you're not out there trying to drive demand and motivate and take care of consumers. You're literally getting to the point of pulling your hair out because you're tangled up in this. So one of the things that Tracy and I talk about all the time, I think it might be rule number 4 on the road to retail is 1, don't be needy. And rule number 5 is pay people who know exactly what they're doing. Don't be the person who fails for free versus pay someone who knows what they're doing. So on that upbeat note, let's continue. So Sidhu, can you just give us a couple of examples, without naming brands, but can you give a couple of examples of mistakes you have seen brands make trying to either get set up on their own where, they break the glass finally and call you guys and say, "Oh my God, can you please help us?"
Man, we can do the entire episode on this thing. I think,
I'm sure. I'm sure.
but no, there are quite a few which we see on a daily basis. And the very first thing I would call out is um, not starting too soon enough. So just like I said, once the brand kind of gets that's the yes from the buyer and they get into the celebration mode, and the weeks passes by and kind of then they realize that they have to do some work to get this ready. So as I said, I think one thing is just the kind of sheer delay to start the process. That's number one mistake. I think, as I said earlier, they must get into the on the process quite early before even they kind of get into the conversation with the retailer. Second thing, which is very near and dear to me, second, I would say, very what we work on is data readiness. If they have incomplete and inconsistent data, they they don't have the images right, they don't have the descriptions, the dimensions, and all those things. That hurts the setup process. So in order to have the setup process go smoothly, you have to have all this data that is required by retailer. Sometime a retailer asks for hundreds of attributes, and you must have enough time to gather that information from different teams, different departments from the brand side. For example, I was kind of looking at this last week. We working with a brand, and they gave us an image from their social media or from their website, which has text overlays and all those things, which is not acceptable by most of the retailers.
Yeah.
Retailers have very, very unique requirements about the images. They want a white background, minimum resolution, no text overlays. So the image, which is just right for your Instagram or your website, may not be the right one for the retailer that they are looking for. Um, and the last, I would kind of touch upon this, having all these gaps. Most of the time I have seen the ownership in the on the brand side. And what I mean by that is there is no single person or team which is owning that item setup process. It
Mhm.
is not treated as a project in the company. And once it's not treated as a project in the company, then it's kind of the communication gets mishandled. If the retailer sends some sort of response back, it gets buried into email. Nobody responds to it. And now brands is kind of losing on the launch date or the time frame the retailer has set up for them. So all these kind of come together and you know just hurts the entire timeline in the process for the brand.
Yeah. So you've got to have a high sense of urgency to get set up right away. Stop celebrating sooner than later and get going on your setup process because again, the retailer's on a schedule. They have a scheduled, as Bruce said, planogram. So you have to get set up so they can get the PO, they can receive the product and get it on the shelf. All that takes time. And they have a set calendar, correct, of, okay, the product is going to be set on the shelf week of June 15th. And if you're not getting set up, you're going to miss that date and that is not going to be good.
And to build on what Tracy just said, before there's even getting to the shelf, there's usually a first order date where your product has to be in their distribution centers, which might be 6 or 8 weeks before the new planograms hit. So you need to be set up probably at least a couple of weeks before that first order is supposed to be in the DCs, because one of the things that Tracy and I have spoken with all of you about before is, while it's a bit dramatic, taking on a new brand or new supplier is a bit of a career risk for a buyer. And the more you struggle to get what they think is the simple stuff right, they're going to get nervous. And if they get nervous, they might bail on you. And most of these retailers only look at categories once a year. And if they don't think there's enough innovation, sometimes it's more than just 1 year. So when that train leaves the station, you need to not only be on it, you need to be on the right train, and you got to find your seat. Okay.
Yes, absolutely. So we've talked about mistakes. Let's talk about the other side of the equation. Give us some examples of some brands that and you don't have to name any names, that got the process right. Like they nailed it. What does that look like?
Yeah,
Aside from all the brands that are smart enough to work with Mirchi Labs.
Of course.
for
Of course.
sure. Now, from my latest projects that we worked on, I could remember two instances. One is we work with this small and medium. There's a food and beverage brand. Um, I think what they did right is they came to us quite early in the stage. So before even I believe they had their first conversation with the buyer, they kind of came to us in terms of what do they need. So they have enough kind of leeway in terms on the time side.
Mhm.
They could work on their GS1 barcodes, the insurance certifications. We helped them choose the right platform on the EDI side because they didn't have the internal um, expertise on the EDI. So we kind of helped them kind of choose the EDI platform. So again, the time is on their side. They had this good start and in terms of thing. The other brand I can think of, and this is very unique, like unique in terms of from their perspective, they were this is a health and beauty brand. They were doing well on the local or regional retail side. And while they were kind of, selling on the regional retail, they were doing the item setup and everything by themselves manually. They wanted to expand into national retail, and hence they came to us. And what changed for them is what they were doing manually when they were working with the regional retailers. When we took over the project, we started doing things well, obviously we have expertise across 80 different retailers, but we also have tools for the data mapping, the enrichment of their data. So we kind of shortened that life cycle of their data readiness by almost by half or one third. And this is again, they chose the right partner at the right moment so that they don't have to go through that manual setup for the national retailer, which just hurts them in getting ready for on the retail side.
Excellent.
Yep.
Excellent.
So, Sudu, in all your experience, tell us a little bit about why you think it's so important that a brand gets pricing correct right from the start.
Well, first of all, I'll acknowledge that I'm not a pricing strategist. I have never not launched this kind of product by myself, but I can definitely speak for it from the ops side because we do see an impact when the pricing is not thought through correctly from the brand side. And I always think like in a very simple terms, Tracy and Bruce, just look at from the extreme right-hand side, which is the retail side. So the retail margins are fixed.
Yeah.
The trade spend is fixed. The shipping and the freight cost are what they are. So when the brand is kind of thinking about the pricing, they cannot just pull this thing out of their back pocket. They have to think through all these other costs, which are pretty much non-negotiable. They're fixed. They cannot move them. And we see the impact when they come to us And they kind of, it's just like you said, Tracy, nothing is free, right? So they come to us, and the item setup cost is also a cost to them. So when they come to us, we started seeing those kind of friction points, and it is too late in the game because then you cannot unwind and go back to the buyer and renegotiate the price. So my only recommendation is a brand should definitely work with a pricing strategist, CFO who knows about this thing. They should know what their floor is. They must stress test their price, because when they run a 20% discount or promotion on the retail side, what does it do to their cost? All these things. So they must kind of look at all these factors before they kind of land into a price for their product.
Yeah,
Yes.
absolutely.
So, folks, one of the things Sudu just said, which we've heard from a lot of guests, we've had pricing episodes with Jeff Lovering, Todd Johnson. There's probably another one, but off the top of my head, you can't just take your cost of goods from your contract manufacturer, or if you're making it yourself, and do a simple markup. There are a lot of other line items that go into
Yes.
your P&L. So instead of the zeal to rush to market to start selling stuff, take some time and work through those line items and talk to people who know. This is also another reason Tracy and I always recommend, especially if you're really just getting started, go direct to consumer on your own website first if you have the right price to weight ratio, meaning your product's kind of expensive and maybe not too heavy or fragile. So, shipping DTC can work for you because you're a little bit camouflaged if you make some mistakes. You can make those corrections, but once you start working with Sudu and his team, and he's getting you set up at the Krogers and Myers and BJ's of the world, those errors are really hard to fix because the
Yes.
buyers at the retailers will be like, hey, Tracy, I'm really sorry that you screwed up, but that's not my problem. And that leads to the trail of tears. Tracy,
Absolutely.
let's talk AI. I mean, we have to. It's a new rule in the
That's
country. We
right,
have to
exactly. I
talk
was just
AI.
going to say the same thing. If we have a podcast now, we don't talk about AI, we're going to have a
We get
mutiny on our
deleted.
hands. Yes, exactly. So, Sadu, talk to us about how AI and automation is changing, catalog operations, and what does that really mean for small and emerging brands?
For sure. And again, this is another subject I can speak directly, because we are investing quite a bit on AI within Mirchi Labs. So if you look at this from the catalog operations point, historically, it was a manual task. Someone kind of sits down with the product spec or PDF in their hand, like looking at this thing, and then they start mapping that product spec against the retail requirement. For all the attributes that they're looking at the images, resizing the images, um, building the content, writing the copywriting and all those things. It was all being done manually. So the kind of, the if whole, it was a tedious work, and it was kind of, taking not just days, like weeks and months. And if you're working across multiple retailers, it just multiplies, because
Yeah.
now, right? So with the AI, one thing which I have seen, and this is kind of, benefiting the emerging brands as well, this has reduced or compressed the whole cycle. It has come from months to weeks, and sometimes it comes to days now. Um, at Mirchi Labs, we have started using AI to map the product content against the retail requirements using AI, using like their taxonomy. Not only that, if there is any uh, inconsistencies in the data, incompleteness in the data, we help enrich it through using AI. We're also kind of, solving the retailer feedback at a much faster scale than we used to do, like I always said 3 years back, because everything was very manual. The retailer sent something, we were reading it, interpreting it, and then resubmitting the content. Now it has become much faster. So, and this is kind of, not in just of the time, but it also has become the cost down for the emerging brands, because, whatever kind of, costing them dollars, now it's doing in cents because of the time investment in this thing. One thing I would like to call out, even though we talk about AI in every single instance, with Mirchi Labs, we also along with AI, we also work with human in the loop because we understand AI is not perfect and we cannot trust AI 100%. So we always have AI and we call it HITL, human in the loop, go along the way. So something is done through AI, there's always a human in the loop, kind of, making sure that there's no hallucinations, there is no something which is not going on the retail side just by kind of, machine is reading it and they have suggested it. So we kind of, take that measure in order to help the brands.
I love that. Love that. I've never heard that an acronym, human in the loop, but I like that, and I know Bruce does as well.
Well, I think that's important because we all hear the
Yeah.
stories of people who get lazy, frankly, and just use AI, pick your brand or model, and it gives you some crazy data, and then when you ask it for sources, it's like sources that don't exist or just, crazy. So you got to have that human in the loop, at least for the foreseeable future. Thank goodness. Otherwise, who would do this podcast? We'd have like three large language models just talking, and it would be incredibly uninteresting. All right, Sudu. So now that you've been doing Mirchi Labs for a while, you're out heading to a San Francisco Giants game, and someone comes up to you and says, "Hey, Sudu, I'm thinking of starting a CPG brand. Any tips for me?" Aside from telling him, "Oh my gosh, don't do that," what would you say to this person?
I would be honest here. I have never started a CPG brand by myself. So whatever I'll speak from the experience on the ops side and kind of working with several hundreds of brands that I've worked with. Um, I think I'll keep it short in a way that there's so much excitement on the front end of it, like in the retail, the packaging, the brand recognition, and all those things. My advice is to the brands is, or those who want to get into this, that while you're falling in love with the front end of it, always understand the back end part of it. And back end part of is the readiness, what we just talked earlier, like having your barcodes ready, having the certificates, the insurance, the data preparation, all that is the non-sexy, like a boring
Yes,
stuff. But someone has to kind of, think about it. So my read on that is, yes, the front end is important, but also kind of, have a team or person kind of, looking into the back end side of it. Because that has to be in place in order to launch your product.
yeah. It's all
I
the
mean, that
non-glamorous, unsexy part of starting a brand.
Well, that's very sound counsel. Everyone just wants to go race the car on the track, but do they have a mechanic? Do you have tires? Do you have an engine? Do you have a steering wheel? Do you know how to drive? I mean, there's all kinds of things that go into it. So focusing on kind of the guts of the operation, at least equally as trying to develop, your core idea, vital. Tracy?
Absolutely. So we're rounding third and heading home here, Sadu. This has been great so far. So talk to our audience about who's had the greatest influence on your career and why.
I would, it's a little unconventional for me to say that there's no single person or one mentor for me. I think the most I have learned in my career, looking at things kind of, not working. That has been my way of kind of, learning through, um, like learning from the mistakes I've made, mistakes people, like seeing other people making the mistakes. Um, and this is kind of, true from the retail space as well. Like while working with almost 20 years on different platforms, I have seen brands kind of, struggle through this very fundamental stuff in terms of, data preparedness, while they're kind of, excited about launching the brand, but they don't have the basics covered. And that is one of the reasons I started Mirchi Labs, because I knew there were some great brands, great products, real opportunities out there, but it's just a missing gap. The brands did not know how to get there. Like they were looking for this kind of, helping hand to help execute them, how to get to the point from point A to point B. And so when I saw that kind of, it was not pretty, it was not fun, but I saw where the gaps are. And that has motivated me to kind of, start these operations and the company to kind of, make sure that brands kind of not struggling. What can be fixed?
Awesome.
Sounds good. Okay, Sudu, a vital question here as we get close to the end. Who is your favorite sports team, band, or brand, and why do you support them?
All right, I'll pick a brand over a band or a sports team today.
Okay.
And I would say Amazon has been my favorite brand. You hate them or love them, that's one part of it. Not as a shopper, but from where I sit on the retail commerce side. What I have seen in last almost 20 years for the retail commerce. Yes, they are not easy to work with, but I think it's more of a feature than a bug in this process because most of the retailers that we work with, they're trying to get where Amazon is today.
Yeah.
In there's like, in terms of how their product on their website. And so I believe that yes, there are some kind of, you may not like it, you know, a stage where most of the brands, if you are doing well with Amazon, you can kind of, do pretty good with other retailers as well.
Well, that's true. All right. So, Sidhu, this has been fantastic. How can people reach out to you and learn more about Mirchi Labs? I mean, one thing that comes to mind, if I had heard this episode was interested, I'd want to talk to you about what's it take to work with you guys, how long does it take to get set up, etc. So, how can people reach out to learn more?
I think the best way to connect with us is through our website. There is a contact form. There is also a link which kind of, directly talks connects with our calendar. So they can set up a half an hour or 15 minutes introductory session with one of our team members. Uh, People can also find me on LinkedIn, Sudu Gupta at Mirchi Labs. Those are the two best places to find me.
All right. Well, thank you so much for that. Folks, you now know where to find Sidhu. Okay, Tracy, the big finish.
Absolutely, Sudu. This has been awesome. I know this is going to be extremely helpful to our small emerging brand audience, and we really appreciate you joining us today. So, thank you again very much. And audience, continue to subscribe to our Spotify, Apple podcast. We post every Tuesday. Follow us on LinkedIn, also our YouTube channel, and we also have a website where you can access all of our episodes, and that is www.road2retail.com. So find us on any platform and subscribe. We really would appreciate that very, very much. And thank you again, Sidhu. This has been a fantastic episode. So thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much. Good luck out there, folks.